Hello and welcome to another episode of the Podium Podcast. I'm Simon Hartley.
And I'm Tom May.
And over the years, I've spoken to hundreds, probably thousands of people who talk about the power of translating elite sports thinking into business. And I genuinely think it's a wonderful concept, but I want to know how it works, and particularly what works and what doesn't. So through the course of these shows, we're going to talk to some people who have made that transition and are now translating their sporting mindset into another field of life. Today, we are joined by an amazing guest, former Premiership rugby player, Ed Jackson. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thanks, Simon. Hi, Tom. Yeah, good to be here. I wish I was a Premier League player. That I probably wouldn't have to be doing all the work I have to do now to keep a roof over my head.
It's one of those interesting things, isn't it? Because Tom and I have reflected on this in the past. Loads of people out there in the world who watch sport will probably think that every professional player that retires either doesn't need to work again or would just waltz into something. But, you know, the truth is far from that. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about your playing career to start with? How did you get into playing professional rugby and what was your playing career like?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Bath in the West Country, which is obviously a big rugby town. So I've played since quite a young age, but actually I was a swimmer and tennis player when I was a kid. That resulted in me getting a scholarship to a school called Millfield down here in the southwest, which is a big sporting school. And within sort of a week of having to get up at 5 a.m. and do 2 hours in the pool every morning before school as a 14-year-old, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. That's ridiculous. You take it far too seriously. So I just wanted to do what my mates were doing. And that was rugby and cricket. So they were the two sports I played a lot up until the age of 16, where the school's so sort of, I don't know, elite in terms of that in at the sporting end that they made me pick one. And I had a good mate who was equally good at rugby and cricket as well, and he goes, I'll have a crack at cricket, you have a crack at rugby, and that's what we did. So he ended up going professional in cricket. I was lucky enough to go professional in rugby. Played at Bath for 3 years. Apologies, I've just got back from the mountains, and breathing in all that cold air has messed my throat up a bit. But I played for Bath for 3 years, which is amazing because it was my childhood club. I grew up watching them, but then I had a couple of really bad shoulder injuries. I actually ended up having 3 shoulder reconstructions by the age of 21. Over mobile shoulders from swimming was the thought. And I nearly gave up there, nearly retired, nearly had to, which was tough to face at that age. But I gave it one more shot, moved up to Doncaster in the Championship, which is a bit of a culture shock coming from Bath, but absolutely loved it. Played a full season in the Championship, which makes you grow up pretty quickly when you're a forward at 21 years old. So all the dark arts were going on, and then from there moved on to London Welsh, who of course Tom has played for before as well. We won the Premiership. We won the Championship that year, which was kind of unprecedented. Then had a year in the Premiership. Actually did really well before Christmas. We'd won 4 games, sitting sort of 7th or 8th in the table, but then strength in depth told, and we ended up getting docks and points for feeding an eligible player. So got unlucky, got relegated again. I jumped over to Wasps then. Played 2 years there. Absolutely loved it. And then signed for the Dragons. So played 2 years there, and just signed another 2 years. So a bit of a sort of turbulent career, a bit of a journeyman, I suppose, but I look back on it very fondly. I played for 5 different clubs. Off the back of that, I've had loads of cool experiences in different leagues and made lots of great friends from it. So it came to an abrupt end, as I'm sure we'll get on to, but I was very lucky to play for 10 years. I definitely look at it that way.
Yeah. Having grown up in Somerset as well, I can remember playing rugby against Millfield. We got our butts kicked every single time, quite severely. I can remember growing up down there. It was brilliant, and it, like you said, it is a real hotbed of rugby down there. A career of that kind of length.
Not at the moment.
You're talking about moving clubs. No, that's true. Being a Bath fan, I'm on the sharp end of that one, like you are. But yeah, a career of any length usually has got some challenges in it. You mentioned some injuries, you mentioned moving clubs. Which were the biggest challenges whilst you were playing?
I think the biggest challenge I faced was dealing with those injuries at 20, 21 years old, because I'd come through all the age groups as, captain of England 16s, captain of England 18s, a year young, and my trajectory wasn't, it was going a certain way, and there was a lot of early chat going on about where my career might be heading, and then all of a sudden, it's completely taken out of your hands. I was the youngest forward to make their debut for Bath ever, and against Tigers, and it was all going really well. And then you dislocate your shoulder, and you're like, okay, I can deal with that. I'll get back in 9 months' time. But then first game back, it happens again, and your body just starts letting you down. But it's there's nothing you can really do about it. In hindsight, it's something that made me a lot more resilient, and I wouldn't have ended up having the experience I had. There is a certain element of what if, I suppose. But everyone has that in their careers. No one gets through completely unscathed. A lot better players than me have had to retire because of injury. So it's just part and parcel of it. But you realise that with age, you mature and you can look back and understand that. But at the time, as a youngster, it's hard to deal with, and having to contemplate giving it up at that age was really tough. And you don't know anything else. That's all I'd done since I was 16, 17. I'd always played sport. I never really considered doing anything else. I'd been offered a contract for when I left school at 16, so the school books went out the window straight away. It's the worst thing you can tell a 16-year-old is they're going to play sport for a living when they leave school. So I was just terrified of what was outside of that bubble, the uncertainty involved, what else I was going to do. And then the other challenges I faced, I suppose, are normally based around injury, but also having to move clubs quite a lot. I was probably one of those players, being a back row who effectively couldn't tackle with their left shoulder for their whole career, because of how messed up it was quite difficult to hold on to contracts or hold on to starting positions. But again, it was that fear of the unknown. Every time I had to move, there was that nervous feeling of like, oh God, I'm leaving my mates. What's going to happen here? Is anyone going to like me? All of those things. But then you realise actually you're just joining another club with the same makeup of people. Might be 50 players, 45 good lads, three absolute weirdos, and 2 people you don't really get on with. And that's pretty similar wherever you move. And actually having those new experiences, I actually started looking forward to the point where when I got to Dragons and I signed for 2 years, I was absolutely loving living down in Cardiff and living in Wales, and we were losing most weeks, but it was an amazing experience. I was playing with Toby Faletau on the back row, and it was the first time where I'd chosen to re-sign, and it felt a bit weird, like staying in the same place and committing for more than 2 years. So that thing that had originally started as, what you'd look at from the outside as a disadvantage, or a lot of people want to end up re-signing and playing for the same club over and over again, ended up being something that I really embraced, and that's a good example of just once you get forced out of your comfort zone and it starts to normalise. I saw the benefits in moving and having those different experiences and playing in different leagues. So that's something that I sort of carry with me now in terms of not being afraid of change and actually seeking out those uncomfortable environments and those things that might make you nervous in the first place. Often all the good stuff's on the other side of that.
And you mentioned that I didn't actually know that about your tennis and your cricket. I mean, your swimming. Were you more naturally talented at tennis or rugby, or was it swimming that it was just the hours of the day that you just put you off?
I was definitely more naturally talented at swimming, and I'm definitely better in water now than I am on land. But that's probably just 'cause I'm so bad on land these days. But yeah, it was just what my parents put me into. I was very into individual sports. That's what they were interested in. No one in my family played rugby. I was the first person. It was very much just a case of that's what my mates were doing, and I didn't want to just be stuck with my head underwater the whole time. I think if I had stuck it out, I probably would have got further in swimming. Tennis is a different one. It's a big unknown. I think it's it's so hard to break through in tennis. You've got to be one of the best in the world at a very young age. And I wasn't that. I was national level, but I would have said swimming, I would have had a shot, but I wasn't prepared to commit to how unsociable the training was. I think, weirdly, I took a lot from it. I've always been naturally quite fit because of that. I think the lung capacity thing, and I've also been able to sort of grind things out. Just the nature of being able to put yourself through relentless exercise or pain and monotonous movements over and over again, which is kind of something I've had to do since my accident and rehab. And I think a lot of that was bred in the pool, probably born in the pool, but it was just boring, mate. If you've met swimmers, most swimmers, they're just like, they don't operate well in social scenarios or just on land in general. Adam Peaty's a big exception for this. Most of the people I knew just walked around school like zombies because they were so tired and would fall over because they weren't in water.
The swimmers that I've met often describe staring at that black line as being, sort of the dominant thing in their whole experience, just staring at a black line at the bottom of the pool. You mentioned the accident, and I mean, we were talking about rugby challenges. I suspect that nothing will ever come close to what happened to you in, was it 2017? Can you tell us what happened and really how you've responded to it?
Yeah, I actually had a shoulder operation. It was the first time I dislocated my shoulder in 8 years or whatever since the last time playing at Bath, and it was fine. I just had to have a bit of keyhole surgery, and then I was laying up until the summer. So that happened in January 2017. April 2017, I went home for the weekend because it was a nice day and wanted to go and visit the parents. And obviously I wasn't playing because I was recovering from an operation. Went round to family friend's house to use the pool. Really innocuous. Went down to the pool. They had a feature pool with a waterfall in one end. And I just took my t-shirt off and dived in where the waterfall hit the water. And I couldn't see how deep it was, but I assumed it was deep. And because I was recovering from a shoulder operation, I didn't put my arms properly above my head. And I dived in at such an angle that it turned out I was only about 3 feet deep. I hit my head so hard on the top that I dislocated my C6, C7 vertebrae, which is the two vertebrae at the bottom of your neck, and the disc in between exploded. And I suffered a really serious spinal cord injury. I was rendered completely paralysed from the shoulders down, also almost immediately. Luckily, my friend and my dad were in the pool. They could pull me to the surface, and so I didn't drown. But yeah, I then went on, had a 7-hour operation to realign my neck, but picked the bits of disc out of my spinal cord, and I woke up in intensive care completely paralysed from the shoulders down. So it was a very scary time. Even after a week, I hadn't had any movement or sensation return, and I was told by the doctors that was it. I was going to be complete. I was a complete injury. I was going to be a quadriplegic for life. I was hoping to get the use of my arms back so I could use a wheelchair, but in terms of walking, that was kind of out of the question. But it turned out I was one of the lucky ones. I had enough still intact that I could work with. I had an amazing support network of physios, friends and family, and over the course of the next 6-9 months, a year, I managed to get back on my feet. And that came from a first time my toe wiggled after 9 days intensive care to now hobbling up mountains. I'm still very much a quadriplegic. I'm an incomplete quad. I have my hands and legs are both affected. I have poor movement down my left side. My left hand doesn't function very well. My left leg doesn't function very well. Right side functions better, but I've got no sensation. And then I still have all the underlying issues that go along with a spinal cord injury, so bladder, bowel, sexual function, temperature regulation, spasms, all of those things on a daily basis I have to deal with. But I shouldn't be walking. I should be in a wheelchair. I should have full-time care, if it had gone by the book. So I feel very lucky to even be able to do any of those things. One of those things would have, if you'd told me it was going to happen to me when I was a professional rugby player, like you'll never be able to use your left hand properly again, or you're not going to be able to sleep longer than 3 hours because you're going to have spasms all the time, or you're going to have to wear a urine drainage bag daily. Like one of those things would have ruined me. I think I would have thought it was going to ruin me, but in perspective against where I should be, weirdly, I'm a much more positive person than I was before. It's given me sort of a new lease of life. It's given me a new layer of gratitude to everything that I've already got, rather than the things that I don't, and everything that I've gone on to do since the accident is actually as a result of that mindset shift from surviving a life-changing injury and having to live daily with what goes along with it, but most of all realizing how lucky I am to be here at all.
Those immediate moments, I guess, when you wake up and you realise that something massive has happened to you in such a quick instant. What's the immediate reaction from internally, and how long did that last? And how long did it take you to make that mental shift? If you've just highlighted there.
Yeah, I think it's shock is the first immediate reaction, and you're numb actually to start with. You're scared for sure. I think uncertainty is the biggest cause of anxiety, and you don't know what the rest of your life's going to look like. The first week was really hard mentally. I think at night, if I'm honest, some of the thoughts I had, I never want to think again, and I've had an insight into what some people have to live with on a daily basis who have those sort of mental health challenges. So I have a lot more compassion for that. But I think it was the first sign I saw progress was the first time I could turn that mindset around. And the initial thoughts I had were, right, I've just got to do everything I can to try and get better, just so I can look myself in the mirror when I'm still in a wheelchair in a year's time and know that I've done everything I could. Because if I hadn't, and my life was now affecting other people's life, my mum's, my wife's, whatever, whoever that might be, because they were having to care for me, I wouldn't be able to live with myself, or I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror because I knew I'd cut corners. So it's kind of a way of me being able to just sort of look myself in the mirror in a year's time. I didn't actually think anything was going to happen because the doctors had kind of categorically told me it wasn't. But then when it did, when my toe flicked for the first time, there was that sign of hope, and there was, there's a chance that it's going to move forward. Then I was just, it gave me something to cling on to and something to move forward with, and gave me those steps to put in place. And then it was just trying to stay positive, I think, because you realise that your recovery is massively mental. It's not just physical. You're in a bad headspace, my body would react that way. And when I was in a good headspace, my body would also improve. I'm recovering neurologically, and your brain's your biggest part in your neurology, and I don't think people put enough focus on that. You can just get in the gym and hammer away and try and do reps, but actually if you're frustrated and sad and feeling all those thoughts all the time, then it's not going to have as much of an effect as you would like. So a big part of it became like normalizing things, having friends come in to see me, doing the things that I enjoy, trying to develop those mental ways to stay on top of things and stay positive, whether that be mindfulness or different techniques that I used to use, watching your favorite TV shows, making friends with people in the ward. That became as important part of my recovery as the physical side, getting my friends to sneak me out of my wheelchair to go to the pub every now and again. They were all important processes, important parts of my recovery. So it's hard. It's hard to say what particular moment things shifted, but it was definitely after the first week when I started seeing some progress.
I was going to say, is that come from, I guess, sport, where you're given just a glimmer of hope of a goal or an end target, and then it doesn't really matter what sport, I guess, you're from. You chase that down. Do you think that's a sort of characteristic that you would associate with sports people, that they can use to their own, I guess, positive effect, really, given whatever happens?
Yeah, I think that the main benefits the main things that helped me from being a professional sports person before were the fact that I was overcoming a physical injury. So recovering from one of these things was, yes, staying positive, but it was also doing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of reps in a gym, which wasn't something that was completely alien to me. This was my 7th operation. I'd already had 6 when I was playing, and long rehabs and stuff. So that wasn't alien to me. When the physio gave me, something to do and said, I'll be back in 2 hours, try and do 400 reps, I'd obviously try and do 500. Whereas a lot of people would wait for them to leave the room and stop doing it. So that was probably the main thing. But also it's that roller coaster journey that we spoke about before involved with sport. You win one week, you lose the next. You get a new contract or you get dropped. And actually you learn through playing for a long time or competing in sport that if you're going to end up having a longer career, you've got to be able to manage those ups and those downs. And my recovery process was massively up and down emotionally. So it was not getting too excited when something happened. It was enjoying it, but then going, right, we need to crack on, see what else we can get, and not getting too down when things weren't changing or when I started regressing a certain way, being like, right, come on, what can we do to get back on the horse? And that is very indicative of your typical sporting career, I suppose, especially mine, which was very much ups and downs the whole way through, and I think I definitely lent on that and those experiences during my recovery process for sure.
And we'll come on to what you're doing right now shortly, but had you had any thought as to what post sport was going to look like? You talked about not wanting that bubble to burst from a sporting perspective. I don't want to know what's outside of that. Had you thought about it?
I had, because I was getting to the back end of my career, I suppose. But actually, it wasn't until I was 23 that I ended up doing a degree. So I was probably the last wave of players who was actively advised to not go to university. I was told it'll be a distraction, which is kind of weird to think about that now. But when I signed for Bath, they didn't want us to go to uni. So it hadn't really crossed my mind. And then, fortunately, when I was 23, a few boys started the RPA, persuaded a few boys to do a leadership management degree, distance learning. So I ended up doing that. And actually, I found that I really enjoyed studying. I was petrified of doing it. I really didn't want to start, but when I did, I actually found it was really benefiting my rugby as well, to have that distraction off the pitch. So I then carried on studying. When I finished out, I did a master's in real estate. The only reason I did real estate finance was because I spoke to my mates in the city, and the ones working in commercial property were on the golf course more than the others. There wasn't actually because I had a particular interest in it, but I had carried on studying. So when the accident happened, my mind turned to that, and I actually went and did 8 weeks. About a year and a half later, did 8 weeks in the city working in Knight Frank's head office in their commercial property department, just like work experience, and got accepted onto their grad scheme. So that's the route I would have gone down, and I probably would have enjoyed it. I think it was definitely something that I loved being there for 8 weeks. It was very difficult for me physically because I was, double crutches, having to get on the tube, and I wanted to just try and crack on with things. And I was trying to fit my rehab around it as well. But by that point, things had started to evolve in different areas, and I'd wanted to start giving back. And the idea of the charity had spawned, and they were amazing. They turned to me and said, look, these are the dreams you've got and aspirations. And I was very much in the mindset of just say yes to everything at that point, because when you have to contemplate how short life can be, you just like try and grab every opportunity you can. The door's always open here if you want to come back. So that was an amazing safety net for me to then go on and do all the stuff I'm doing now, knowing that I did have that option, or I do have that option, to go into the real world, if you like, at any point. And that's given me the confidence to take some of the riskier decisions that I have done since.
And what was the moment that you came up with the idea of, the businesses you pulled together, the charity you pulled together? What was where was it? Was it lying there in the hospital bed, and they had a sort of flash of brilliance, or where did it come from?
Well, I do quite a lot of different things at the moment, but and they've all evolved naturally.
Run out of fingers.
Yeah. Exactly. None of them have been planned. So where the thing I do most of the time for my job, if you like, is now delivering keynote talks around resilience, change management, adversity, whatever it might be, to businesses. But the reason that came about was I started speaking about my recovery to hospitals, to other hospitals. Was asked to speak about my recovery because it had been so unprecedented. So they wanted to know what we did. So that was to junior doctors and physios. Then I started speaking to at my old school, and then to universities, and then eventually to businesses, and it just evolved naturally. Like, this is not something I ever planned. Now it's to the point where I've got, a number of different keynote talks planned out, and I go around delivering those to organizations. So that's great, because that allows me to have an income, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time up in terms of hours of the day or hours of the week or hours of the month, and that allows me to spend 90% of my time on our charity, which the reason that came about was I felt useless for a long time. I had no real purpose. Everyone was having to do everything for me. It was really hard to sort of deal with, I suppose. There was a lot of ego involved there, being quite a strong, independent person, to all of a sudden having to be fed through a straw. And I thought that there was only bad coming from this situation until I started this blog and people started getting in contact saying it was really helping. And then there was this glimmer of, wow, I can actually be useful again, to the point where I ended up climbing Snowdon a year after my accident, inviting some people to come along through the blog, whoever might want to turn up. 70 people ended up turning up, which was ridiculous, that I didn't even know,
wow.
all going through their own things. And we had this amazing sort of weekend climbing this mountain. I mean, it was absolutely brutal, but it was incredibly inspiring, and to feel like I was of some use again, and that actually that this bad thing that happened wasn't necessarily all bad. There were positives that can come from this. And then I thought, if enough positives can come from me diving into the wrong end of the swimming pool and breaking my neck, then technically it's not a negative thing anymore. If enough good comes from this, you can by definition say that day was not a bad day, it was a good day. So that's the mission I went on, and that has evolved into a charity where we take other people who've suffered trauma all over the world. This way, I've just got back from Mont Blanc. I'm going out to Morocco on Thursday. We run these trips for people who have suffered trauma, physical or psychological. Then we put them into a 3-year program where they access our network, but also we fund life training, retraining, therapy, whatever it might be, to help them really get back on track. So that effectively just mirrors my own recovery. And I was very fortunate to have my family and friends, the physios I had access to, the rugby community, all of these things that are the reason that I'm back doing what I'm doing now. Yes, I got lucky. Yes, I worked really hard. And yes, I found the outdoors. But actually, really, it's the network of support that I've got. And most people don't have that. We're very lucky to have that network. And I wanted to pay that forward. So that's what we do through the charity. And then, as you know, Tom, and as you do as well, I was lucky enough to get involved in the media side of rugby. So that was a good thing to keep my foot in the door, which has been amazing. And it's now led on to me working with Channel 4 on the Paralympics. And so none of these things are planned. I mean, the fact that I wrote a book is ridiculous. Like, it came during lockdown, but if you'd told me when I was like 19, 20, even 25 that you're going to write a book one day, I wouldn't have believed it. But I started this blog in hospital just to get things out of my mind before I went to sleep. One thing led to another, and then eventually I got approached by a publisher to turn it into a book. And so I suppose this is one of the things I try and tell all of my mates now, at an age where if they haven't already retired, they're retiring, a lot of them facing the unknown, that to not get beating themselves up too much, and you don't have to have a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan set in stone. All you have to do is sort of follow your gut, keep working hard, keep having conversations. Doors will open. You just got to be prepared to walk through them, and life will send things your way. And that's happened to me. I just had an attitude change to say yes to things. I had a completely different perspective on life, so I was more positive day to day as a person, because I felt lucky to just be here. And I think as a result, probably people wanted to work with me more or be around me more, whatever it was. But none of these things have been planned. They've just happened, and I feel very fortunate that they have, and I'm just trying to take advantage of them as they come.
You've had to shift in terms of the physical side of everything, but also I guess there's a certain amount of change of skill set, right? Because you've come from a background where you're playing sport. Have have you always been confident standing up in front of people and talking? You talk about your leadership degree. Were you a leader in the changing room, or were you someone that was vocal, or have you had to trying to sort of understand the uncomfortable feeling of having to upskill doing the things you're doing now, as opposed to what you were in your previous life as a rugby player?
I always found it really difficult. In fact, I used to be more scared of speaking in a changing room than I did of playing whoever we were playing against. And that might sound weird, because I did end up in those sort of captain roles at a lot of the sides I played for, or those leadership roles. But speaking in public was not one of the things that I'd sort of rushed towards. Definitely not as a youngster. I was individual sports. We spoke about swimming and tennis. Actually going to a boarding school was absolutely terrifying for me. But the sport brought this out of me, actually, playing team sports. That communication side, you can't really get away with being an absolute introvert. If you want to be the best possible player, you've got to get the best out of your teammates around you, and you've got to work as a team. And that has started bringing me out of my shell. But since then, this is definitely not a natural career path for me. I think in terms of my, my genetics, if you like, or the nature of the side of things, it's been definitely more nurture to be able to now speak in front of cameras and do live TV and things like that, or speak in front of a room full of 1,000 people. It still makes me nervous, obviously, but it's more almost excited nervous than it was panic, like this could go horribly wrong, because I also have a massive element of perspective now of what is the worst that can happen. Like, no one's going to die. I've wet myself whilst delivering a talk before. That happens these days. It's embarrassing, but it's not the end of the world. And I think actually having that...
Did you hide it? Or was it clear?
No, I brought it. I just brought it in. I was like, sorry, bag's leaking. This is typical. So this is another side of a spinal cord injury. But luckily, I was speaking in a hospital, so it was easy to fix, plus completely understood. Well, I think it would have probably gone down better at a rugby dinner or something. Would have been quite funny. But
yeah, when you've got no out.
yeah, exactly. But it's just like that, what is the worst can happen? I think things are always way, way bigger and way more scary in our heads than they are in reality. And people aren't as judgmental as we think. We always worry that people are thinking about us and judging us, but they're not, actually. So it's something that has just crept up over time and evolved over time. Just like my writing, it started with short posts and blogs, personal diary notes, and now it's a book. It wasn't I'm just going to go from 0 to 100. And I think that again, it's that incremental improvements of being able to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And eventually you do things enough, they get pulled into your comfort zone, I suppose.
So
when you're thinking about
theme that's been
building
brought up by some of the other athletes that we've had on in terms of communication, and how that's been really important as they move into their new careers, whatever it might be, whether it be starting their own businesses or fitting into a corporate environment. How good do you think sport is at developing an individual's communication skills, which then translate into... Because so many sports people go, what the hell can I bring to life after? Where actually, once you actually learn how to strip a sports person back, you realise that actually there's a load of characteristics, a load of traits that are really important to business and to the normal everyday careers. How important do you think communication is, and also what are the other traits that you think you've used in your new careers that you learnt during your sporting career?
Yeah, I mean, communication's vital, right? And especially if you come from a team sport, it is essential. We mentioned that, and actually that to talk about my recovery first, I realised pretty soon that my communication that I was having with my doctors, nurses, physios, they're run off their feet, they're overstretched. I was in the NHS for the first 3 months, and it wasn't like I just had special treatment in private care, and I realised that I've got to almost motivate them as well. We're getting better as a team, so it wasn't just them motivating me, which they did massively, but it was getting everyone in the right headspace and going, yeah, I feel good for this in the morning. Or some of them, they've got their own things going on. Everyone's human, and we had to keep things moving forward as a team. And for me to get the best results out of myself, I also had to, they had to be on their best form as well. So it was about creating those human relationships between each other. So it was friendships as well as just a working relationship, because it was those conversations of how's your family, and if you care more about each other, you're going to work harder for each other. And that comes from rugby, that comes from team sport. And I realized that in my recovery as well. And that was a really important aspect. And actually the physios that I still work with, that I worked initially through the NHS with, are the ones that I have the best personal relationships with. It's not necessarily who's on paper the best physio. That emotional side is really important as well. I think in terms of other skills that I've taken forward, so on the broadcasting side, I kind of realized that actually to get your brain functioning the best possible way, and when you're delivering a live broadcast, as you know, especially recently when I was working on the Paralympics, doing the breakfast show, it's live, it's coming fast at you. I can't just rely on my rugby knowledge. You've got all these different sports, you've got all these different pronunciations, you've got all these different categories of disability within each sport. It's like your brain is just having to go at 1,000 miles an hour. And if you're not on it, you cannot get it right. And it's the same from sport. Your preparation has to be perfect. That comes down to hydration, nutrition, sleep, all of those things that I would do to get ready for a game, I now need to do to get ready for a live broadcast. And I realise that's how I react best. And I suppose in business in general, if you're giving a presentation, or you're in a big meeting, or if you want to be working to your best, you've got to think, or not just mental preparation, but physical preparation. How are you going to get your brain firing properly, and all of those elements, especially nutrition, things like that. If you've got a long day at a game and you've got to then do the last interviews, you've had to do interviews in the morning, you've now got to do the last interviews, you've got to think about what you got in your bag and what you're going to eat throughout that day, and all of those things as well. So I think that's definitely something that comes, I suppose, second nature to us, but actually I probably didn't put enough emphasis on early on since finishing sport in the other areas that I'm working on. But it's something that I've come to realise is really important and can give you an edge sometimes.
So you'll have learnt from your keynote speeches that business tries to learn a lot from sport. What can sport learn from business? It seems to be very one way at times. Let's flip it on its head. Do you think there's anything that sport can learn from business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I haven't. That's probably the wrong way around for me at the moment, just because my business career, if you like, has been. I think there's obviously massive parallels. I haven't worked in big business before. I obviously did my time at Knight Frank, but that was 8 weeks, and probably not enough to learn to get under the skin of things. So I can only speak from my experiences. But I think, actually evolving with whatever the market's doing, if you like, being like fleet-footed, because if you get set in your ways, you see it as a sports team. You got teams who just play the same way the whole time, they always have done, or coaches that try and play the same way or do the same thing. They get left behind. Successful businesses are always pretty mobile. Like they can morph and change and move with whatever's going on in society, whatever's going on in the market. And the best sports teams do that as well, but possibly not as many as could. You see those ones getting left behind. So I think that's probably one of them. I think the other one is that is the communication, because it depends on which team you play for, or which business you're at. But the ones that are very autocratic, I don't think work as well. I think it's the ones where it is where people are empowered to speak up, whether it be in a business, your junior leaders, or in a sports team or a rugby team, your academy members. If they feel like they can put their hand up and add something, then that's normally going to create a more successful environment, and that comes from the top down. Your senior players or your senior leaders in a business. And I think the businesses that I've spoken to, in the past that seem to have had that sort of really cohesive workforce. And you can always tell in the Q&A session at the end of a talk who's willing to put their hand up. Is there silence, across the board until someone asks questions, or you'll get one or two senior people asking questions, or straight away are loads of hands going up? And that often tells me a lot about how empowered the workforce is to actually make decisions themselves and have the confidence to speak. And I think that's an important lesson that can work both ways from sport and business.
So normally at this time of the podcast, Simon hands over to me, but he's gone and made the longest cup of tea in the world, so it's just you and I. I've got 4 quick fire questions to fire off to you here. If you hadn't, and I think I've got the answer to a couple of them. If you hadn't been a professional athlete, what would you have been? And is there another vocation that took your interest? You slightly answered that already.
Well, like I said, I mean, if from a young age, I didn't really want to do anything else but sport. But I did want to be a vet when I was a kid. It's too long to go back in and train for it now. And actually, I've realised that I love animals too much that I can't watch them suffer. So I'd be a terrible vet because I'd just be crying the whole time. And I've got some mates who are vets. But I think if it wasn't sport, that would have been the route I went down.
And who is the person you admire most, first of all in sport, and then secondly in business?
It's a tough question. Like I try and take inspiration from most people that I meet. I think I've met a lot of incredible people recently, especially working in the Paralympics, as you can imagine. In sport, there's a guy called David Smith, who's a former Paralympian, who was one of my mentors through my recovery. He's got a tumour, a non-malignant tumour that grows on his spinal cord, and he's been knocked back to square one, to fully paralysed 4 times, and every time he's made it back to being a world-class Paralympian, but in a different sport each time, because he's come back a little more impaired each time around. So his level of resilience, I've never seen anything like it. It's I've had to do it once, to do it 4 times, but not just get back to being mobile and independent, get back to a high level of sport. It's just incredible. So I'd say he's probably my standout inspiration in sport. In business, just because I've been around him a lot growing up, my dad actually, he was a doctor, he was a GP most of his life, and he took a punt at stepping away from that and starting an insurance company with his mates 15 years ago. Seeing the way that he... Yeah, it's very different. So he's got the medical side and the business side now. And he retired, he's 65, 66, and he stepped away from the insurance company when he was 62 to just have control of some more of his time. But he still works harder than ever. But he still has, which probably wasn't the case when we were a bit younger, when he was in the midst of it. He was always away working, and I get that now. He's looked after our whole family because of it, and our extended family through the graft he's put in. And he came from very humble beginnings, state school lad up in Sheffield, and sort of made it all himself. He's a proper grafter, but he also has a good time as well. He'll be the last one drinking red wine at 11 p.m. on a Sunday when it started at lunch. But he'll be up at 5 a.m. driving to the other end of the country for a meeting the next morning, and doesn't ever want any sort of recognition for that. It's just what he does. So he's instilled that sort of work ethic, I think. I mean, although he's definitely works a lot harder than me. So I'd say from a business standpoint, it'd be him.
So when you've accumulated your cash from renting your garage out to your brother right now, you've got a wad of money to invest. What are you going to invest in?
So some mates of mine, some people I know, they run one of the biggest wine investment firms in the world, Cult Wines, and I invested some money with them last 3 or 4 years ago, which has just done incredibly well. And it's such a fun thing to be invested in, because you can click on your portfolio every now and again and just dream about the bottles of wine, which you're never actually going to see. You could see them if you decided to pull them out, but you shouldn't. You can dream about these wines you own, even though they're stored on the other side of the country in a cave somewhere. But it's a fun thing to be invested with, and it's a bit different, and the returns have been great. So I think if I did come across a wad of money, which isn't going to come from my brother living in my garage, because I'm not charging him rent at the moment, that's probably what I'd put it into.
Like it. Okay, you've got last one. You've got one film that you can watch for the rest of your life. what would it be?
God, I mean, if you watch any film for the rest of your life, you're going to go insane, aren't you? I was going to say
you're gonna get bored of it.
Silence of the Lambs is my favourite film, but I'd probably end up
Oh,
eating someone.
wow.
You couldn't watch that over and over again.
Yeah. I'm
not
not sure your brother would come round to rent your garage.
Yeah, exactly. It'd have to be a comedy, something like, I don't know, Happy Gilmore or something like that.
Brilliant. Love it. Hey, look, Ed, it's been great to chat to you over the last, 45 minutes. 2/3 of the team have been here. One was a lazy bastard and buggered off. But
I'm
it's
here.
been great to have you on the Podium podcast. And thank you for listening, all those that have listened. Spread the word. There's loads more to come from us here at the Podium podcast.
Cheers, Tommy.